Hello, welcome to another episode of the Robert E. Howard Foundation YouTube channel. Today, I have two experts on Robert E. Howard's boxing fiction. Mark Finn, who's been on the channel several times. Welcome back, Mark. And a newcomer, Chris Gruber. This is your first time on the channel, Chris, so congratulations.
Thank
It's good
you.
to have you on.
It's great to
Uh,
be
you,
here. Thank you.
you two were the main editors for the four-volume collection of all of Howard's boxing stories. So we are going to be talking just about how important boxing was to Robert E. Howard, to his writing, general overview of the four-book series, but then we're going to probably spend a whole lot more on the first volume of Fists of Iron, Volume 1, for this episode. So, gentlemen, first question. How did you two become boxing fans?
You want to, how do you want to do this, Mark? Do you want to go first?
Your volume's cut out, Mark. There's no audio from you. Of course, that would make it go faster. So,
Well, I thought he was the veteran, the old ring savvy mongoose.
There he is. How about that?
All
there
right.
you're on now. Yes, sir.
Okay. So my boxing origin story is a lot shorter than Chris's, but because I came up in the 70s, so for me, my heavyweight champion was Muhammad Ali. And so Ali was the one that really initially drove my interest in boxing as a sport. And then I found out that Randall Tex Cobb was a boxer who had fought uh, Leon Spinks and the other guy that just beat the cowboy shit out of him. I forget who it was, but he's from Abilene, and that just blew my mind. And so that has always been an interest of mine, just sort of academically. I got interested in the history of it, and I came to Howard's boxing stories sort of the same way. I stumbled across. I had seen the Iron Man on the shelf of bookstores, the Grant hardcover,
Oh,
but I ran across the Zebra Iron Man and Incredible Adventures of Dennis Dorgan with that cool, yeah, not that cover,
okay.
but the other one with the Gene Day cover or the Dan Day cover. Anyways, those stories in there were the Dennis Dorgan stories, which we now know to be Costigan stories under a pseudonym. Those stories, it was specifically the Destiny Gorilla that hit me between the eyes and said, not only is this guy funny, but he's like my kind of funny. And so it was just reading a couple of them in a row and realizing what they were and realizing that he'd done a lot of them that just sort of kicked that door open. And between Howard and an interest in like the golden age of boxing, those naturally crisscrossed. Group?
Yes, my boxing origin story is significantly longer, but I'll keep it short. It really began with the movie Rocky 2. Uh, I wrote about this a long time ago. My dad took me to see Rocky 2, and at the end of the movie, I had watched this redemption story take place for hour and a half, and this guy that nobody felt was deserving of a success, that he should even be there. Uh, he suddenly was the champ. He had done the impossible, and I, as a little kid, I didn't want to be in that particular movie. I wanted to see something else, and I remember feeling overwhelmed. And then everybody in the studio stood up, or in the theater, they stood up and clapped. I was talking to my mom about this just the other day, and everyone remembers that they were clapping at the end of that movie.
Yeah.
It was so stirring. And so fast forward just a little bit from that moment. As a little kid, I was poor, quite poor growing up, and put in my place quite often. And I felt an affinity for Rocky Balboa. And my mom married Manny Flores, and he became my dad. And he's the one that took me to the movie with my mom, and we started watching. I'd written about this too. We started watching boxing together, but there was a particular fight. It was the Holmes Cooney fight,
Ooh.
and the Holmes Cooney fight. By the way, and this is serendipity at work. I'm not really sure, but June 11th.
Oh,
I didn't know that until
Wow.
recently. June 11th,
wow.
and isn't that something? Now the Holmes Cooney fight. My dad held a party down in the basement of my new house. Now I had a house now. I had a basement. I even had a dog. I had in the space of like 3 months, I went from trailer with no windows in the back to house. It was amazing. And all his friends from Abbott Laboratories, where he worked and my mom worked, they were all there. The family, he had a large family. It was packed with people. And they were just excited about this fight. They were betting, smoking, arguing, yelling, oohing and eyeing over every punch landed. Early knockdown of Cooney, you could hear the whole half the room. Oh, a bum. And then he somehow picks himself up off the canvas and extends the fight into the later rounds. And the other side, oh, I can't believe it. He's got no skills. He's got one punch, the left hook. Anyhow, I was taking all this in because it was just I'd never been around anything like this, anything. And the fans, I could see them because it was a pay-per-view event. It was like HBO or something like that way back in the day. It's one of the first ones they did like this. I was hooked right then, but I started really thinking about in the lead up to this particular talk that we're having. I started really thinking about it. What was my origin story? Well, the thing that cemented it was a sad, sad, sad tale. Ray Boom Boom Mancini fought what was his name? Uh, Kim Duck Do, but I think they called him Do Duck Kim. But they fought, and he was out. The South Korean was just he should have been in the ring with him at that point in his career. And sadly, uh, he died. And not long after, his mother committed suicide. And not long after that, the referee committed suicide. And I remember reading about it because it was news. You could hear it on TV. Um, and I thought, man, I was cheering every blow for both guys. And I wasn't cheering against Mancini. It wasn't like that. But I was cognizant of the effort and the bravery and the earnest desire to succeed and the guts and grit,
Yeah.
of Kim. And I was pulling for some excitement at the end, and I didn't get that. I got a sobering reminder that boxing is not something you play.
Yeah.
Uh, and I do recall though how I felt watching Ray Mancini's reaction and over the course of like a year or two because it was in the news. It was like actual news, and I realized just how powerful the sport was. And those things kind of coalesced. And I was becoming a man at the time. I was still a young teen, but I had been the only guy in the house. You know what I mean? And now I had this hyper masculine dad, Manny, who was a go-getter, alpha male, and I was just trying to find my way. And I was already kind of scrappy. I was kind of like a Kid Allison type, running around, doing my fighting thing and earning a reputation. Uh, I just I couldn't get enough of the sport, and I started to read about it independently. And then finally, my dad, by virtue of him marrying my mom, I got a new family out of it, the Flores family, and I got to meet aunts and uncles and grandma and grandpa. And my grandpa Refugio Flores, we would go over to his house once or twice a week, my dad and I, just him and me. And grandpa would be sitting in his favorite chair smoking a stogie, and he'd say, "Chris, boxing." Oh, I'd run over there. I got in this new grandpa, sit down next to him, and we just start talking boxing. And he'd explain to me what I was seeing, and he helped change it. And meanwhile, my dad, who already knew boxing, he was in the other room with grandma getting fed. You know, so that went on for a long time, and I was really, really lucky. And that is my introduction to the sport of boxing. And of course, I took it up myself later, but that's how I started.
Yeah.
Okay. Kind of talked about it a little bit, Mark, but for both of you, when did you become REH fans?
Oh, that's just about everybody else's origin story. My age or thereabouts. Uh, I had found Conan,
Hmm.
pop culture Conan, but was really interested in the stories behind the comic book and the movie. And so I started reading Conan, and quickly, by the time I was in high school, had found Bran McMorran and Solomon Kane and Cull, and some of the horror stories and some other things like that. I the boxing stories, I didn't get to those until well, I can specifically tell you it was 1990. I was 21 years old, and I just moved to Austin. And that the book I mentioned, The Incredible Adventures of Dennis Dorgan, was the first book I bought in at Austin in that time. That was my sort of my new chapter of life book, and it ended up being oddly prophetic because I'm talking about this 30 something years later.
Yeah.
you know that's that's kind of cool. That's kind of cool.
How about you, Chris?
Similar to Mark's, every chance I get, I try to squeeze a name in though, because without her, honestly, I wouldn't have likely come to any of this in the manner that I did. And that is Eileen Donahoe. She ran Galaxy of Books at that time in Zion, Illinois. And she treated me so good. Oh man. So I came through the comics, Conan comics, and anything kind of revolving around sword and sorcery at the time. So,
Yeah.
uh, but Conan was my entryway, the comic books, Buscema, Thomas, those guys, and Savage Swords, just anything to do with it. It was me. She said, "Well, would you like to read Robert E. Howard?" And I didn't understand what she was saying. And she grabs the comic book, holds it open, and says, created by the Robert E. Howard. I said, sure. I thought she meant another comic book. Nope, she gave me a book, and it was I think it was one of the Lancers that'll make somebody that we both know very happy. And I I read it and I was like, oh my Lord, this is incredible. This is amazing. And I came back and I went into her used bookstore and I looked for covers that were similar to that. Oh, grab this one, grab this one. And my, money and a little kid didn't often meet, so I was doing a lot of stuff to get the money for the comics, and now I had to add books. Well, those other books weren't that good. Well, they weren't as good. And the big thing was for me, the gateway, if you will, is she saw me not learning how to read in the sense of, ABCD, but coming to appreciate writing. And
Yeah.
she, as it turns out, was a huge Robert E. Howard fan. And this would have been about 1982, so pretty early.
Yeah.
Uh, she gave me a couple more books, and I didn't know until many, many, many years later when she was talking to my kids before she just passed away last year. Uh, she'd say, "Oh, she told my kids about me as a little kid," and she said he didn't know it, but some of those books were worth quite a bit of money. And so I asked her for more. I said, I need more of that Robert E. Howard because the other stuff just isn't that it's not as good. It's not what I thought. I was disappointed, in fact. And she went out and found me a book, and that book was the one I just held up earlier. The Incredible Adventures of Dennis Dorgan. This book actually, it's this book, and inside you've got the Galaxy of Books imprint, and $1 she had written in pencil
Oh
to
my
Chris.
God.
Yep, to Chris. And uh, if you look at this thing, it talks about Genghis Khan and the ancient Orient and the mysterious East, and and it's got what appear to be poisonous snakes around this menacing ironclad warrior. And I'm thinking, oh yeah, and it says right on the front here, Conan, Robert E. Howard. I'm thinking I'm set. Well, I go home, instantly open it, and it's boxing. And I think I read like less than a paragraph. I was disgusted. I'm not reading this, but I got in trouble a lot as a kid. And one of the days that I got, grounded, I was put into, a big boy timeout, which was like a week. Oh, you can't do anything. First day, I'm looking around, I'm already bored, and there's that book still sitting on the floor at the foot of my bed. So I'm like, all right, fine. I figured I would read one of the stories because I think there's like 8 of them in there, something like 10 of them. A few hours later, I was done, and I thought, oh, and that, guys, is the moment. I already liked Robert E. Howard because of Conan.
Right.
It's because that he wrote these boxing stories that I'm like, suddenly I had needed that. I wanted more of that. It was so good. I can't even tell you. I had my own Spike in the backyard. Her name was Nikki, and I was just like, this is amazing. I can't believe it. And it caused me to go out and look for more Robert E. Howard because she told me that he wrote lots of different stuff, is what she said. And it's because of her and Galaxy of Books that I came to Conan in the manner and the way and the fullness that I did.
Outstanding. She did a rope-a-dope.
She did, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Badass.
Yeah, it's cool. She was something else. I miss her.
That's good stuff, man.
Well, so you were both boxing fans and you discovered Howard's stories on boxing, the Dennis Dorgan stories. And for people out there who don't know, who may have heard about Dennis Dorgan, may think that this was another character that Howard wrote several stories with. Do you two go ahead and explain exactly what Dennis Dorgan was in regards to
And
his boxing stories?
go ahead, Finn.
Well, it's actually it's not a big mystery. Um, there was a convention in pulp publishing that and it wasn't really a rule, but everybody just sort of, it was kind of like understood that you did not publish the same person twice or more in a magazine. There's a apocryphal story about Frederick Faust or Zane Grey. One particular issue had a Zane Grey story in it, and then it had like all these other stories, and they were all written by the same guy. Sometimes that just happened. Well, in this case, he had sent the guys that were publishing Dorgan were, I think they'd gone to quarterly or maybe bi-monthly. I forget which one it was, but he had sent this story in that, and he'd sent it to Farnsworth Wright for Oriental Tales or Magic Carpet. And Howard already had a story in that issue. And so I don't know if he suggested it or Wright suggested it or if they came up with it together. Probably Howard, since he chose the name Patrick Irwin, which was a combination of a bunch of stuff. But because he had Dennis Dorgan, or because he had Steve Costigan at Fight Stories, he crossed out the proper names of the main character, his dog, and the ship. And with the Patrick Irwin or Patrick Irvin and the new Dennis Dorgan clapped onto it, he was hoping to get a little extra boost on boxing from that. Unfortunately, they advertised another story from him, but the story that had appeared, the issue that appeared in, was the last issue of Magic Carpet. So they didn't do any others. But and this was kind of lost to time. And so when they were gathering stuff up to put together, they knew about the boxing stories, but didn't think anybody was interested. Glenn had put a couple of things in different fanzines, and Daryl
Richardson?
Thank you, from Facts, I think was the one. Dennis is going to get mad at me if I get this wrong. I'm pretty sure Daryl was the one that went ahead and organized all of the unsold Costigans. We have seen the transcripts where Howard, on the first couple of pages, went through and crossed out Seagirl and wrote Python, but he only does it for like the first page and a half. And then after that, he's just, these are the notes, and I guess they changed it there. But the book was put together from unsold Sailor Steve Costigan stories that, for one reason or another, had started to be Dorganized, and then that's it. But make no mistake, they were Costigan stories from the get go, and the fact that the crew and the stories and the way that they're told and the timbre and all of the language and all of it is the same. It's just that they had done this little trick, I guess, because that's what the industry sort of dictated. And I guess that's still sort of a faux pas. But in any case, so the first boxing stories most people saw was either the serious ones in the Iron Man, the Grant collection, or it was this Dennis Dorgan collection, because those were the only books that these were in for a long time. The other random boxing stories that did that Glenn did put in other places, they were in fanzines or they were in semi-pro zines, and they were great if you knew what they were and could get them. But we haven't. Those two books were the only ones that were available on the bookshelf until 2015. That's how long all of that was out of the light. Grub, did I miss anything?
Well, no, not really. Well, you and I were doing collections before 2015, so
right, we had started looking at that, and of course, Fight Stories, Robert E. Howard's Fight magazine from Necronomicon Press, which for both Grub and I was
that was
a watershed moment. Yeah.
Yes.
That this was a small press guy, Mark Michaud from Necronomicon Press, who was a big Howard fan, and he started publishing those stories from Fight Stories and Action Stories, and Rusty Burke was editing and doing little introductions. So that was the first time we'd seen more than just the Dorgans in one place.
Right.
And man, that was boy,
Yeah.
When I first came to Howard days way back before, when I rode in on a dinosaur, that's how long ago it was. But when I met Rusty for the first time, the first thing I asked Rusty was, so about the next Fight Stories, when are we going to see that? It wasn't a Conan story. It wasn't a Glenn Lord question. It wasn't, it was a boxing question. I cornered him at the post office to grill him on that. So he probably doesn't remember that, but that was those things I can't overemphasize just how important those were, that they finally were available. It was the first time we'd had an inkling of how much of that stuff had not been.
Well, and that might dovetail into something that we'll talk about later, John. But Mark, that was when you and I really began to talk.
Yes.
I think because I've been haunting Howard Days for 3 or 4 years at that point.
Mm-hmm.
I had a nickname, I guess, that I wasn't even aware of. Marine guy or something like that.
Oh.
And people thought I was a little stern or something. And I know I'm hard to get to know, but once I figure you're a straight shooter, everything's good, and I never shut up. So,
Chris, we were just really impressed that you were both height, weight, proportionate for your age range. That was very impressive to the rest of us. We were like, wow, he's got less body fat than all of us. That was so yes, you were very impressive from the get-go.
All right. Well, I can tell you this though. I think about 2001 is when I think I really met you.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next few years, somebody, I think it was Leo maybe, or no, Rusty or Leo is the one that got me to do Rehu, because I didn't even know what that was.
Right.
There were a lot of things though that we were talking about, but that was the primary one because it led to a desire to do what we're going to be talking about later, right? I mean, this is how far back it goes, these conversations.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I remember when our first like big conversation was during one of those freak gully washer storms that happens periodically.
Pavilion Kitchen.
We were in the pavilion kitchen.
Back to
The everything outside was sideways because the wind was just blowing. The water was coming in sideways. Everything was bent over. Everyone else in the room is going, "Oh my God, are we going to be okay?" And me and Chris are like, "Okay." So in the Destiny Gorilla, when he says that thing, we were just like that about it. And I don't remember like when the storm was over. I just remember we just kept talking. So yeah.
That was 2002, 2003, right?
It was 2000. It was 2001.
Okay, yeah.
Because we both got into REHF the following thing.
Okay,
yeah.
Very good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
let me
go ahead, John. We've hijacked you.
Well, let me back up because I completely screwed that up about Dennis Dorgan. For the people who don't know, Howard started making money with his first humorous boxing character, Steve Costigan. And my understanding is that for some of the Costigan stories that got rejected, that's when he went on ahead and changed them to Dennis Dorgan stories. And I know I don't have them right at my fingertips. I could spend some time calling it up, but I can remember seeing some of the Otis Klein agency pay sheets where they list the story as Dennis Dorgan, and so that you have several where you can tell that Howard went on ahead and rewrote it as a Dennis Dorgan story to send it in, and he was sending these Dennis Dorgan stories, and I forget which pulp. You guys may know which pulp was buying the some of the Dennis Dorgan stories.
Wasn't it like Oriental Ventures and Magic Carpet magazine?
It was Magic Carpet and Oriental. It was Wright's companion, his historical fiction companion, and I think by playing up the Asiatic seas a little bit, he thought that would be I don't think it's a perfect shoe in for Magic Carpet, which tended to be a little bit more serious, but I don't care as long as it got published. That's if Wright was willing to theoretically buy it, we'll presume that he got a check for that, but there's no way of knowing with that. But that was it was just for that, and I think at that point Klein, I think he might have been shopping around the stuff that wasn't sold to Magic Carpet because Klein comes in after that, and that was the deal. I think he was trying to just what he could get, but by then Jack Dempsey's Fight magazine had kicked off, and so Howard put a Costigan story in every one of those issues until it folded. So he was working with that boxing material. Well, just assuming not counting the juvenilia and the early other stuff, which we'll talk about. When Fight Stories premiered in 28, Howard's first story shows up in 29. So it's a pretty safe bet that from the get-go he was submitting. And so they paid on acceptance. I know we talked about this in one of the other podcasts. That Fiction House paid on acceptance. And so right at the time that he made the deal with his dad, hey, give it a year. If I can't make some money doing this after 1 year, I'll go get a bookkeeping job somewhere and not bother you about it again. And the boxing stories were the things that was the money that, he started selling to that, and that became that was steady income.
Yeah.
And it was enough to get dad off his back because that never came up again after that. So those were from 29 until the very end. If he could sell a boxing story, he sold it. And he was particular about the Costigans because he kept writing them. That should tell you something right there, and the Steve and the Kid Allison stuff that got mentioned, they were so popular that somebody asked him, hey, can we publish this character instead? And he said, no, but I'll write you another one. There's
that
not any
character being Costigan.
That was the Kid Allison stories for Sports Story magazine. There is not another character in Howard's canon that people were so excited about that they asked him to like swipe it. It wasn't until Breck Elkins at the end, when Jack Burns said, I want some more funny cowboy stuff, that he started doing that. But the boxing stories were part of Howard's writing career for all of it.
Yeah,
So
they're a launch. They're like a launch pad for many things that came later. Brack Elkins, Conan, the world building with Conan, um, the episodic approach to the Breck Elkins stories, the the way what he was doing, he did it often in his work and his approach to writing, taking elements that he thought would be successful here, but didn't quite make it, moving it over here, but not just cut and paste. It was a thoughtful approach to I'll use this idea and put it in here, but I'll make it fit this other idea I've gotten together, because I knew that had some legs, and maybe I can learn and pull a little bit of that positivity from this genre and put it in here and rethink this. I think that's helped also in his approach to what we call genre work now. But I mean, to these amalgamations, these genre creations that he's attributed to having started. I think it was because he was pulling a little from here and a little bit of here that he said, well, these things were successful. Let me put them in here and see if I can help, because I haven't been able to sell this way.
yeah,
And so I think that you get to see the genesis of all this creativity and process in the boxing stuff. And it's one of the reasons why I think it's worth preserving the work and promoting it. But
yeah.
All right. Next question. So you kind of talked a little bit about this. Why did you two, or well, yeah, let me back that up. Why and when did you two decide that, hey, maybe we should start getting all of the boxing stuff put together to show how important it was to Robert E. Howard's writing career?
oh man, do you want to go first?
I think it was organic. I don't think we came to it all at once. I think we did bits and pieces. You did some recitations and some storytelling at a couple of the Howard days.
Yeah, I did.
And yeah, and I
Yeah, yeah.
remember we talked about that. And around the time that this was kicking off, I was doing the Violet Crown radio players in Austin, the radio troupe. And I don't know why I thought that I could do the boxing stories as a radio play.
Hmm.
I just knew that I wanted to see if I could pull it off. And I thought, if I can perform this the way I hear it in my head when I read it, then it's a lot easier to sell. If I tell you, hey, the guy that wrote Conan wrote these funny boxing stories and they're just great, there's 3 words there that might just knock you right out of that sentence. Between Conan and funny and boxing, if you're not down with all of those, that's going to be kind of a hard sell. But if you listen to somebody read a story, I think you take it in differently than if you're reading it yourself. And that was what I was doing with the Violet Crown stuff. I wanted to specifically do that. I wanted to see if I could get the boxing stories over in a way that identified them as Texan in nature, and also played to what I thought or what I felt in my bones was the way Howard was writing and subsequent telling those jokes. There's timing issues, and there's beats and pauses, and so I think it was us just kind of, at Howard days, we'd talk about it amongst ourselves, and then we'd go talk to the people, and then we'd come back and talk about it a little bit more. And every time we would bring something in, it was something different. And Leo was one of the other guys that was real early on, like, oh yeah, boxing. And so it really, for a time, was just sort of the 3 of us. And they didn't make fun of us, but but we were, everybody else was talking about Conan over there, and then talking about the boxing stuff over there. It
Well,
it it didn't have the cachet that it has now.
well, Finn, for me, it was a circle in the wagons kind of approach.
Yeah.
For me, it goes all the way back to high school. And my buddy, well, I had a club. I was a part of the gamers club, believe it or not. I Everyone had their own favorite author, okay? And mine was Howard. I couldn't read Howard in class. They would take the books away.
Yeah.
Everyone was like almost against Robert E. Howard, like it was some low form of verbal pornography or something that just couldn't be shared with anyone. It was so low brow that I was wasting my time and rotting my brain. And my friends were all Tolkien fans, and I liked Tolkien, but I didn't love it like that. But I
Right.
did love Howard, so I had been promoting, defending, fighting for Howard since the very beginning. And when I got to Ruhupa, um, kind of like the Mount Rushmore for us, right? All these, Rusty and all these different people who are running these APAs, and I was a little intimidated, but I knew right away. And this is how you and I connected later at a Howard Days. We talked about how nobody's talking about boxing, and so I started in my Iron Legions APA. I would start talking about boxing. You
Yep.
were already talking about boxing. You wrote a gosh, I'm gonna forget the name of it, but it was like Fists of Robert E. Howard, I think it was called.
Yeah.
And
For Don
yeah,
Herron's book. Mhm.
so it was the very beginning, and I realized it was an echo chamber in the sense that only you were parroting back what I was saying, and Leo too. And so, like you said, we three were pushing it unofficially in Rahupa,
Yeah.
and then using, I guess, the cult of personality that we both possess in different measures uh, at Howard Days. And it kind of dawned on us that I think just through sheer willpower, repetition, kind of like Iron Man, like we just kept going forward, pushing, pushing, pushing. The idea that you don't have to love them, but you got to respect them.
That's it.
And we need to the way that the respect is going to come is having something to read.
Yep.
And you and I and Leo, we started a project to finish what Rusty and Michaud did in Necronomicon Press, if you recall. I don't know
Yep.
if you recall this.
Oh yeah.
Um,
It was going to
and
be two stories per volume. Yep. It was we had a
we
whole
had this whole thing,
system.
yeah.
Yeah.
We were at the proofing stage, if you recall. And the problem, if you want to call it that, and that kind of will lead us to where we're going. The problem that came up was the trunk. And that became like the water cooler talk at Howard Days. Everyone's just going crazy. What is going on with all this stuff? Uh, and no one really talked about what might be in it outside of, the big three, Conan,
Right.
Tom Kane, and King Cole. No one was really talking about what might be in there. And we were, though. And you mentioned what I was bringing every year at Howard Days to try to get people interested. I was doing things like conversation with Costigan. I took
Yes.
Costigan, which is, by the way, I've done with Kid Ellison too.
Oh, good.
I acted like I was a interviewer from an old time fight magazine, and I was talking to Costigan and letting him reflect on his career, and taking actual things that he said as answers to the questions. And I shared that, and then I had the top 10. I had I had a vote one year. How many votes for Costigan? How many for Brennan? How many for Kirby Carnes? How many for Slade Costigan? Who's the greatest Howard Ironman? I had a list of I would bring every year something different. I
Yeah.
even had one year everyone had to and that kind of got this is the first year where I felt a little pushback. In fact, was when I brought a questionnaire, which was a trivia piece.
Yes.
And Rusty, I remember Rusty Burke, godfather of Robert E. Howard studies, right? He, I go, here we go, Rusty, fill this out, and he goes, Chris, well, he didn't say anything other than well, like and he didn't reach for it. He did not reach for it. Now, as you know, I'm able to take no for an answer. Not. Instead, I waited for him later on at the pavilion, and he's fond of his whiskey, and so I brought some whiskey over, sat down, got him talking, and then he goes, you're changing my mind a little, but I just don't see it. And so
Yeah.
I took that opportunity to just bombard him with my enthusiasm. And then I backed it up with excerpts. And then I gave him more whiskey, and he agreed. Imagine that.
Yes.
He agreed with me. And suddenly he became evangelistic, just like me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it goes back. We
It really
Mark and
was a
I
hearts
have
and
been
mind
doing.
campaign. It
Yeah,
was a campaign of inches. Yeah.
do you remember also them's fighting words? Um,
Oh yes.
so I put together this chapbook with Leo Grin's The Cimmerian called Them's Fighting Words because I was going through the limited number of letters we had, and I was looking and I'm like, well, there's a boxing reference, there's a boxing and it sort of get out of hand. I couldn't count
Yeah.
them on, everyone's hands and feet. And I said to myself, wouldn't it be cool if we could reference this when we're talking about this or that theme? Especially for me at the time was already percolating in my brain about atavism and then the Iron Man,
Yeah.
as a archetype. And this is the things that we were talking about, and we put that chapbook together and and again this comes to the trunk. There's so much that we didn't know
Right.
about it, and so lots of fits and starts, which makes what we've accomplished with Patrice and Rob Ream and the folks at the Foundation Press. We're able to actually provide the fullest story possible with regard to this genre and everything everything boxing and associated with Howard. I mean,
Yeah.
this is it. This is the pinnacle, really. So sorry again, John. I go off in different directions. I'm like a runaway river, man.
Well,
Hey,
it's okay. If you need to, I'll jump in as the referee and wave
thank you.
off.
Thank you.
uh,
Get a standing 8 count. Sure.
let's talk about Robert E. Howard's love of boxing. People who may, or they probably do have an idea that, or they may know that he was involved in a fight club there at Cross Plains where they would meet at the Icehouse and have pickup boxing matches, that he taught himself how to box. He also would get involved in other amateur pickup boxing matches at school, I think. I seem to remember a letter where he was possibly in Brownwood, where he was at one of the athletic clubs there and was doing some pickup boxing there. But how important was boxing to Robert E. Howard, to his personality, and eventually to his writing?
At the turn of the century and well into the 20th century, the three major sports in America were baseball, horse racing, and boxing. Those were the three. Those were the big three. Football was still a collegiate thing, and so were a lot of the other sports that are now, absolutely huge. It's hard for people now to maybe contextualize just how important boxing was and what a cultural phenomenon it was, and really it played an important role through most of the 20th century anyways. I mean, people that don't follow the sport know the names of boxing heavyweights. That's pretty interesting. And so Howard was an early fan, in the way that everybody was, but I think he took to it because of the physicality, and the also boxing is kind of unique as a sport because, well, uh, this is not my observation. This is Joyce Carol Oates's observation on boxing, wherein she likes to liken what a writer does to what a boxer does. Um, when a writer sits down at a keyboard, it's just that person with their thoughts alone. And it's not some people can write in a crowd or in a noisy place, but there's a concentration aspect. It's just me when I'm writing. Ditto the boxer who gets into the ring. There's no, I mean, it doesn't matter what the cut man and the corner man are doing. He's by himself in the ring. And I think that might have appealed to some of Howard's individualism and his pride. He had a certain amount of pride for how his strength and his stamina and things like that, and I think that fed into it. But that was a way for him to be social with his buddies. You know, they did. He later found people that were writers and literary and all that, and they boxed too. So again, it was a very different. It held a different place in culture than it does now. But I think the boxing, because he liked it so much, I think it ended up being a metaphor for him in a lot of ways. Uh, yeah.
Yeah.
You want to add anything to that group?
Yeah. You know, one of the joys of doing this project and all the research that led up to it and being lucky to be asked to be a part of it was in Fist of Iron 1, there's the appendices in the back, okay? And those appendices, what you have is detailed accounts of a young Robert E. Howard writing out fantasy lists of his top 10 boxers at welterweight, middleweight, height, weight, orthodox, southpaw, very specific typing exercises that he used boxers and boxers' names. But there was more to it. He began talking with his friends about boxing. It's something he enjoyed. The idea, Mark, that you mentioned just a second ago about socialization.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in boxing at the time was, as you mentioned earlier, is top three sport in America certainly, and probably certainly one of the top sports in the world.
Yeah.
Um, it's one of those it's one of those enduring sports, if you want to call it a sport, which it's a spectacle really. And everybody understands that you don't have to understand the rules. Really, you know what you're seeing, okay? And there's an aspect of manliness. You got to remember, at the time uh, that Howard was growing up, he was growing up in the shadow of Teddy Roosevelt's masculine America, this regeneration, excuse me, rejuvenation, this rejection of the mechanical world coming around,
Right.
and this idea of science taking over the manly aspects of man. And he encouraged Americans as the president to embrace manly endeavors like boxing, which would allow the healthy constituents of life. It would bring you back to the past, and the past being some mythical golden era of humanity.
Yeah.
Something to be held up on a pedestal. This is the supreme man found in our primitive past.
Right.
And you'll see that Howard soaked this all up, but also at the same time, the Police Gazette, National Police Gazette, the Ring magazine, started publishing soon thereafter, like the 1920s. The National Police Gazette basically created legends, excuse me,
That's
legends.
it. Yes.
Okay. And John L. Sullivan being probably the primary example of masculinity as
Yeah.
emerging Americans, people as America was kind of leaving the Gilded Age and moving into this new manly world. It is sandwiched. Howard grew up in an era, a very short one, that was sandwiched between this Gilded Age refinement, everyone knowing their place, and the Jazz Age, where everything goes. But he grew up with exceptional amount of change. We take change for granted now in our world today, but at the time, Jack Johnson and his taking the heavyweight crown, being allowed to fight for it, for instance, that was huge. This is in the shadow
Let
of
me
that.
let
And
me back you up there because most
sure.
people probably are not going to know who John L. Sullivan and Jack Johnson were. So keep
Okay,
keep that in mind. You
I will.
know,
All right.
because we're talking
Well,
names, famous boxing names, people who follow boxing, but these are people who will probably be watching this video saying, should I read any of Howard's boxing stuff? What's it
yeah, yeah.
about? So, we start, oh, John L.
What's the
Sullivan and Jack
cool?
Dempsey and Jack Johnson. There's
Well,
like,
then I will back up a moment and I will give you just a little bit of background. I'm kind of doing that with the whole Roosevelt talk and that turn of the last century. So going from the 1800s to the 1900s, that was a period in American history of change,
Yeah.
social change. You had everything from temperance movements to racial incongruities. People fighting over who should be allowed to do what. The shadow of the Civil War was still hovering over America. Okay,
Mhm.
and you had whole groups of minorities from Europe and Africa and every place in between who were trying to find their footing in this new world. Okay, and it was all happening for once. Quickly. You were moving from an agrarian society to a mechanized. People were frightened then, just like we're frightened of AI now. They were frightened of the changes, okay, that the Ford's assembly lines would cause. Well, How am I going to drive a car when I've got this horse? There's a lot of things were going on that caused change,
Right.
and I'm saying that Teddy Roosevelt, the one-time president of the United States, was pushing American men to take up um, the constituents of the past, those emblematic traits of manhood that made America, in his mind, great. And we were losing that, and
Yeah.
we stood to lose that. We have the hordes of different people coming. We've got lots of social fears and anxieties were occurring at that time. Okay, and John L. Sullivan was an Irish, well, he was of Irish stock. He was an American, but he was an Irish American, I guess you could call it.
Right.
And he was the last bare knuckled boxing heavyweight champion of the world. And he was an American. No American had really held that title before. We'd had several that were close. John L. Sullivan was more than just a boxer. He was a cultural phenomenon, the
Mhm.
likes of which we would have trouble finding in the sporting world today. A man who so captured what it meant to be a brash, bold, braggadocious American than John L. Sullivan, embracing both his Irish heritage, but also what it means to be American,
Yeah.
what it means to be a man. He was a hard drinking, uh, tough fighting um, boxing champion. So historically speaking, he was the epitome of the
They
press's attempt to make a legend, and he
yeah.
became one with his fists. Um, and by the way, those same appendices that we talked about focus heavily on John L. Sullivan. Howard talked a lot about this particular character.
Mhm.
When Jack Johnson became the first black American heavyweight champion of the world. I throw American in there because a lot of people just say black champion, but it was important to say he was an American champion from that time. He
Right.
was historically very, very important, not just to boxing, which clearly, that's an amazing feat, but also to America and one Jack London, a famous American writer, one of Robert E. Howard's most favorite writers for himself to read. He was writing newspaper articles, sporting articles, leading up to the fights between Tommy Burns, one-time heavyweight champion, who lost his title to Jack Johnson. But then again, goading on a retired previous champion, one of the greatest Ironmen that Robert E. Howard had latched onto as being a hero, someone to emulate, Jim Jeffries, James Jeffries. And the impact that boxing and these particular characters had on the masculine approach to Howard's fiction cannot be understated. And I wanted to kind of bring that in, Mark, because I don't think people know how to answer the question that John posed earlier to us. Why should they read these things? And
Yeah.
I'm telling you that these stories are not what the L. Sprague de Camps of the world have insisted. And that is, this is really just trite. It's neat, it's action-packed, but it has no real bearing on anything. It's not
Right.
fun to read. It's not interesting. Why would I want this or why would I want that? This is America at that time.
Yeah.
These boxing stories reflect that, and they were prominently placed in everybody's psyche, right in their viewpoint. Boxing, boxing, boxing. And Howard was just picking up that mantle and he was changing it. He was
Yeah.
constructing his own version of what it was to be manly. He was creating things right on the fly that other people and people who bought his work could understand. And
Yeah.
even today we can understand it. So anyhow, a little off track, but that's why, John, I brought it up and why I think that it is worth considering if you're going to study Robert E. Howard.
Yeah. The Howard's one of his passions was folklore. And he loved folklore and folk ballads and collected them and talked about them and had correspondence with guys from Adventure who went on to
Robert Gordon.
Gordon was the guy that did the archive, the National Folk Archive at the Smithsonian. He and Lovecraft talked about folklore. Well, probably the only sport that has more folklore than boxing would be baseball. But there was a huge amount of folklore around boxing. The stories that were told and retold, the larger than life characters. I always think of for people that if you've heard anything about John L. Sullivan, you've heard him walking into a bar and saying, "I can lick any son of a bitch in here." That was his open air. That where he walked into new bars. These were all basically myths and legends. And so when Howard created his Costigan verse, his boxing world, he used the mechanisms of fiction to sort of weave his fictional boxers into the legends and lore of these other boxers. He was very fond of mentioning of former Golden Age champions and things in the same breath as the boxers that he was writing about. This all fed into that. And it was an early world building attempt for Howard, one that we think he moved into other areas. This idea of having these things all be sort of like connected. But it was also, I think, the folklore and the appeal of the stories, I think, was those have a larger than life aspect. And boy, you can say that about a lot of Howard stuff, that it's got a larger than life aspect. The two people that Chris and I think are primary components of Costigan is Jack Dempsey, which again is somebody that people that have never been a boxing fan have heard of. Dempsey was Howard's heavyweight champion when all this was going on, and lots of stories about Dempsey that he self-mythologized in the press. And the other one is Sailor Tom Sharkey, who was an actual Iron Man that fought all of these other big guys to a standstill. And the stories around Sharkey just are, you got to hear him to believe him, man. The guy, there was not a thing he said about himself that was true. I don't think, but the guy could tell a story. And the stories that people told about him are the ones that sound like things. They just sound like stuff out of Steve Costigan's playbook, man. There, and especially the way he describes Costigan and the way we know Dempsey and both Sharkey, they both had a real compact sort of kind of a Cro-Magnon kind of sort of stance about him. And Sharkey, he looked half like a gorilla anyways. He had a massive chest, like a 60-inch chest on a guy that was 5'6". He was basically a fire plug. He was basically a giant. He was like a column. And Dipsy was fast and agile, and he had that lean pantherish physique that Howard has mentioned before in the case of other things. But all of this stuff feeds into the other Howard stories. And I just it's Chris said it best, and because we said this a lot, you don't have to like them, but you have to acknowledge them. They need to be included in the conversation. If it's not your favorite thing, that's fine. But if you're not looking at the boxing stories, you're not seeing about 1/3 of what Howard wrote. And you can't make an assessment based on that. We talked about this with Breck too, John, I know. But it's the same thing. It's these are the areas of Howard's career that have been overshadowed by Conan, and to a lesser extent Solomon Kane, Brad McMorran, and Cull. But the hero, nothing against the Hero Kings at all.
No.
But he did everything too. So we just wanted a complete picture. I think that was the gist. Let other people decide if they like them, because they need to read them. And if you don't have them out, they can't read them. I'm not asking somebody, I can't give them a pitch, an elevator pitch, and they go, where can I find this? I go, well, you got to go on eBay. There's a guy named Steve. He's got these things for sale now. They're really expensive, so only start with one. Yeah, that's not going to get it done. you know, People need to get to the stuff, and so that was our drive: get this stuff out. We'd had the good fortune of having people that knew us and go, oh, you like the boxing stories? Here's the thing, or here's a letter, or look at this. I got this a long time ago. Let me see it. So we had the pipeline, but there were 30 people in Rehupa.
Yeah. At any given time, yeah.
At the most. So nothing goes forward until people can read them for themselves. That's the deal. That was the drive.
And we promoted, going back to the promotion question that you posed to us. One of the things that we did, and I don't think we thought of it this way at the time, but looking back, it was a natural fit. When we did Fists at the Icehouse, it was like a promotional TV show almost.
Let me just interrupt you real quick in case people don't know. Fist at the Icehouse is the talk that you guys give, where you talk about Howard's boxing fiction and even read some of the excerpts from some of the stories at Howard Days. So please continue, Chris.
Yeah, we didn't. I think we did it just to kind of get the ball rolling with regard to the boxing stuff, with the intentions that we've already stated. What I wasn't prepared for was how popular it became. And I can tell you, Mark, I think you have a similar story, but I think it was the second or third year that we had done it. And we used to do it in a day, and we used to do it over at the Icehouse itself. And I used to be in better shape than I am now at 55. And what I would do is I would hop around. And Leo Grin used to be in the crowd, usually, just kind of like taking it all in. And I think he's like 6'7", 6'8".
Yeah.
And
he's 6'12".
And I would like, I'd bounce around, and nobody really the first couple of years knew who I was yet. And I would walk through the crowd, bulldogging folks, and I would pick initially I would pick the biggest or the strongest looking guy. And back, every year Howard Days attracts a lot of different types of people, and some of them are muscleheads, some of them are really big, some of them are not. Yeah, but everyone's unique, and I would pretend like I was calling them out, and we're going to fight there. This is right after Mark would be talking about what was done at the Icehouse, and later I would change that to pick out the smallest, oldest lady I could find, to make it more fun. But when we did these things, one day I had somebody come up to me who I'd seen at Howard Days a couple times. He says, I bought your Bison books, for instance. And Bison Books was a project that Rusty invited me to assemble a best of Howard's boxing story. There it is. There's it right there, John.
There you go. Thank you.
And I had never done anything like it, but it was another opportunity to promote Howard.
Right.
Everything Mark and I do with regard to this is for Howard, to promote Robert E. Howard, the author, the person, and the stories. And I've written a lot of essays because people want to know my opinion on why am I doing this? You know, there's so much time of your life. I could go into it, but we don't have time. Suffice it to say that such a powerful connection was made between the words that were on those papers
Hmm.
that I read, those books, and what went into who I am, and it went straight to my heart rather than my head at first. Um, and when my head came around, I said to myself, I really want to give back because I've never been outside of my marriage. I've never, or my kids, I've never been moved
Yeah.
in the way that I've been moved and gotten the camaraderie, made new friends, learned things that I would never have learned or had the opportunity had not Robert E. Howard come into my life in the manner that he did. And so I do this because I think the stories are great and I think it's interesting and all that. But I also really hope one day, you know, maybe there's a heaven or something that I can talk to, you know, Bob and say, what'd you think of that collection we did of your stories? Did you
Yeah.
like it? You know, because it means a lot to me. Let's put it that way. It
Yeah.
really, truly means a lot. And I'll do anything at any time to assist in the promotion of what I think is the world's greatest pulp writer, but also my favorite, personal favorite author, period. So anyhow,
All right.
that's sort of that.
So we just mentioned your the bison because the University of Nebraska did several books on Robert E. Howard's stories other than the Conan, the Cull, and the Cane that came out, and you did this boxing story. And Mark, I don't have a copy of it. I'm kicking myself for it. But a couple of years later, you came out with your own copy or your own book with Robert E. Howard's fight stories in it, Waterfront Fists.
Well, yeah,
Why did you do that?
that was one of the Wild Side books that Paul Herman was putting together at the time, and I don't know why he thought of me. I think because we've been at the pavilion and all that kind of stuff, so he knew
What do you?
that. But it was again, it was just like what Chris said. I mean, it was the same deal. This won't be everything, but it's going to be some of them, and as a stopgap, because at the time we knew that the Wandering Star volumes were slowly kind of transmogrifying into the Del Rey editions, and the hardcover Conan stuff was coming out, and we knew it was going to be a while. And I honestly I think in the case of the Bison books, certainly, but we were just trying to get something out to start the conversation, you know. So I was happy to do the introduction for Waterfront Fists. I thought Grube's collection of stuff for the boxing stories was great. The problem is, I took one look at his table of contents and went, how do you choose? How do you which one
Yeah.
which one of your kids do you keep? It was the worst kind of Sophie's choice. But the fact that some Costigan stuff and a Kid Allison story was out there now that people could see and talk about, that was
That was
that was yeah, that was
that was a
it.
primary consideration of mine. I had never done anything like it, so I told Rusty. Well, he said best of, right? And he said your canvas is any of the boxing stuff. We didn't have everything, but what we did have, I knew there'd be something that's just about every reader would like. I mean,
Yeah.
who can read the Bulldog breed, right? And not like it or fighting his pair from Costigan. You know, you read Man with the Mystery Mitts, you're gonna like Kid Allison. There's I tried to assemble what I thought would be a best of
Yeah.
with the idea that I wanted to show different phases of the writing. So you had the humors, you had your straights, you had I think I included Kid Levine is Dead,
Mhm.
the poem. And I showed, hey, this guy, he's really stretching the thematic limits of boxing. He's killing it, man. And he's giving you different. I mean, that's the thing about Robbie Howard in general. Everything you read, when you're done with it, you're like, oh, that was the greatest thing. I wish there was more of that. And then you find out there's something else that's different. It's similar, but it's different. Oh my gosh, with El Barak, now we're talking about Solomon Kane. Oh, and now we're gonna jump over to Costigan. It was a gift that never stopped giving.
Yeah.
Robert E. Howard was a gift that never stopped giving. And so I can tell you this, everything I do is to give back and spread that, because that feeling is rare indeed, my friends.
Mhm.
It's a rare thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and so for us, that was the motivation, was just getting it out so that other people could see it and we could talk to them about it. That um, and we knew that there was going to be something else. They talked about it. We knew by then that the plan was going to be get it all out in print and use the same format that was done on the early Wandering Star editions. Put them in the order that they were written, include a scholarly essay to sort of help contextualize it. And I think early on they said, we want both you and Grube to work on it. And yeah, of course, what we were not prepared for was that when that stuff finally opened up, how much of it there was. Um, it was really daunting to
It
see
was.
it all and be like, there was more than we thought there was. That this was, of course, when the trunk finally got codified and cataloged. There were unfinished excerpts. There was some false starts. Um, it was just a lot of stuff,
Oh, it's amazing.
and Patrice really he's the workhorse in all this,
Yep.
because Patrice was the one, and this is his own fault, by the way. I just want to say out loud, it's his own fault. He's the one that said, let me do this. Okay, well, 20 years later, he's in the boxing stories, and he's got to do 4 volumes worth of figuring out the order that these things go in, and you know again, that was interesting too, seeing all of it. And this was one of the first times, because there was so much stuff in the boxing books, this was the first time that we deviated, and I say we as if I have a decision in all of the Robert E. Howard Foundation press books, which I don't. But I'm just saying, we had a conversation about this because there was so much stuff across so many decades. You couldn't just pull some of it out, because Costigan stories show up in different parts of the timeline. So we thought that it would be better to put all the Costigans together in that order, and then for everything else, do it in volume 1 and volume 4 in the chronological order,
Chronological.
and then grab and then for the Kid Allisons, set those aside, do them in that order. It's a little confusing, but honestly, it would have been, I think it would have been whiplash to try and read them back to back, going from serious to silly, and have the tonal shifts and all of that. It's a lot. It's a lot. So,
Well, I
uh,
think if you recall, we were emailing back and forth at the beginning of this project, and this was a primary concern. But if you recall, before we even got to that phase, Patrice sent an email saying, "Here's the word count," and it was like spreadsheets long of
yeah,
of stories with word counts and it quickly became apparent that we were gonna suffer a little with regard to proofreading.
yeah,
However, there were many, many things inside that list that I hadn't seen.
right,
And and so uh, when you said that he kind of had it coming, well, he had been kind of assembling everything into
yeah.
some order so that we could then, make the decision to how will we present it. And I think the presentation conversation, how we're going to do it, that went fairly well. I what
Oh, I
what
I think so too. Yeah,
what was difficult was getting all three of us in a productive place at the same time. Because I remember he was getting, him and Rob were like having enough of me on, because they were asking for a TypeScript that I didn't have. And it was I think it was copy A that I used in the Bison story for Iron Man.
Oh, I
and
thought it was Mystery Mitts, but okay.
well, it could have been both. And he was asking for it, asking for it, asking for it, and I had a lot going on
Yeah.
at that time, and he had a lot going on because he had deadlines and his own stuff. I think he had the birth of his child at that time. Um,
Lot going. Yeah, we were
yeah,
all
yeah.
busy.
And so anyhow, the point is, there was so much happening at that time that
Mhm.
I thought it was going to be really difficult um, getting what I wanted out of it. And it turned out that what I wanted it to look like was pretty much what you wanted it to look like.
Right.
We had our sidebar conversations, and then we'd kind of like, hey, Patrice, what do you think of this? And he'd say, I think this is how we should do it. And we would have conversations about how should we should we spell surprise with a Z or an S?
Yes.
Would have, and some days I was on Patrice's side and he on mine. Oui. And other times he was on your side.
You
And
know, Patrice must really hate us for impersonating him all the
well,
time.
He should.
I
He
would not
should.
say with it.
He needs to stop being French if he wants us to stop imitating him. I'm sorry. That's just how that works. If
Well,
he's German, we're a lot more respectful.
I wouldn't I wouldn't say what I'm doing is called imitation, but uh, I think you got the gist regardless.
Oh yes, that was yeah, and that was the other thing because initially we thought um, you and I we knew there was going to be a lot, and I think I don't remember if I talked to Patrice or Rob about it, but it was basically, oh, it looks like it's going to be 3 volumes. We were like, cool, same number of volumes as Conan, awesome. And then real quickly it became, nope, it's going to be 4 volumes,
Yeah,
and I
it was
was
just
like, yeah, there it is, right there, man,
that's
four
a that's a
volumes.
that's a trivia fact right there. There's another reason, John, why people need to take these stories seriously if they're going to consider scholarship, articles, essays, whatnot, any kind of delving into Howard the author. You got to include the boxing stuff now, and that was not always the case.
And it worked out. I think I actually 4 volumes worked out. I think best. Again, because Costigan gets 2 volumes to himself, which is I think necessary.
Appropriate.
Yeah, appropriate. But one of the things that Grub and I talked about that we were adamant about was if this is going to be the the boxing project, we need to pull out the stops and we need to do our Rosetta Stone. This is what the boxing stories are. This is what they mean. This is why they're important. And because he and I had been writing so much of this stuff sort of in tandem and parallel to each other anyways, we thought it would be cool if we went every other issue or every other volume. So Chris would start it and I would finish it. And and then we'd each get a Costigan book to talk about. So
Yeah.
that was and because we both had stuff to say about Costigan, but I think it was really important that we also contextualized the beginning of the volume and what this is and why it is, and the end of the volume, which sort of like the summary of everything else. And that's, I think, the thing that uh, I'm not most proud of it, but I'm happiest about it because that is exactly what we wanted that to be. And I think if you read them, in tandem like that, it feels like one really long conversation at the pavilion, uh, you know, with adult beverages on a Saturday night, with us just like ping ponging off of each other. I
Yeah.
think that's my favorite part about it. If you read the boxing volumes, even if you don't read every story, if you read the essays and you read Patrice's notes on how he put it together, I think you'll understand why at least we feel the way we do. And I think that's pretty much all I could probably ask of anybody, you know. Uh
Yeah.
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 Okay. Well, let's take this moment to just, I will briefly hold up the 4 volumes, and guys can just give a quick little rundown of what's in each volume so that people know what the 4 volumes are about. So I guess we'll start off, as of course, with volume 1.
Oh yeah. This book really is the beginning. The stories collected in it are a weird mix of themes. Howard was trying to figure out what he was doing as a writer, how he was going to break into the markets, and one of the markets that was emerging at the time was, the sports. And these stories are an interesting mix of like boxing and horror, well, ghost stories and boxing. You've got the beginnings of his archetype, the Iron Man, that kind of bleeds over into the Iron Man. But what's so cool about that volume is you get to see arguably his the genesis of it, which is a different story, transformed for a slightly different audience. And this is the Iron Man we're talking about. Um, Transformed for a different audience somewhat, and given new life and new breath as a serious boxing story. By the way, in Fist of Iron 1, the Iron Man is the pinnacle of, I think, his serious work, boxing work. It's on par with Jack London's A Piece of Steak, Mexican, all that stuff. It is literally is as good, and everything about it encapsulates everything that you'll find in all those different appendices at the back, which are very informative about who Robert thought of himself as, who he aspired to be, and the kinds of things he was talking about with his friends, and the kinds of things that he was talking about with his friends, how they leaked into his work.
Yeah.
The stories in that volume are just sometimes half starts, non-finishes, but the seeds of other things are always there, and he plucks them expertly and then places them into the right order, and suddenly you have a masterpiece. You get to see the book for what it provides, Howard's legacy, and that is a writer, an American writer who worked at his craft. It's not just I wrote about this boxing book, so there's nothing to tell here. You can
Yeah.
see him work hard as a young man to create something better, working with editors that he'd never done any of these things before. So you're seeing him become a professional writer right before your eyes, using using boxing as the unlikely vehicle.
Yeah.
Okay, the poems are in there. My favorite Robert E. Howard boxing poem is in there, John L. Sullivan, and my second favorite one, Kid Levine is Dead. Um, so, what do you want to say about it, Finn?
No, that you got it. Yeah, it's the beginning. It's early juvenilia, and it's his uh yeah, I've said this before too. He's working stuff out, and especially you can see the humor developing. That's the cool thing is you can it starts out not real funny, and then a joke lands, and then and then suddenly we get to volume 2, and it seems as if Costigan showed up fully formed, but if you've been reading volume 1, it wasn't. It was
Weeping
a
Willow.
yeah, the we oh, I love the Weeping Willow. That
Speaking of
made
humor,
yeah. Speaking of which, yes. So yeah, volume 2 is the beginning of the Costigan stories, and um, so that really is just it. I mean, the first 2 to 3 Costigan stories is his origin story. If you were gonna, because we meet Costigan first, and then we meet Mike the Bulldog, and then we get to the crew. And if you read the first 3 Costigans kind of as a unit, that's your pilot. That's your series pilot. If you like those, you're going to be okay for the rest of it. Um, it's and I talked a little bit about that was my essay, the first one. I really wanted to make sure people got a little something about who Tom Sharkey was, and Jack Dempsey too, because again, Howard wrote what he knew, and he knew this stuff. He read it, he took it in, he did it, he boxed, you know, certainly uh for health reasons, but also for sport. He liked it. So that's all those chickens coming home to roost. And volume 3 just literally picks up at the end of volume 2. And that was yours, Chris. You got to do the Destiny Gorilla. That was in yours.
So,
That's how you know I love you, man. If I'm letting you write about Destiny Gorilla, that's a deep friendship right there.
I feel it all the way over here in Santa Fe. Volume 3 it really is just the rest of the Costigan stories, and they feature a few stories that really should have been blockbuster hits, with the editors, but they weren't. Culture Cauliflowers. The idea, an editor basically tells Howard to do this, write this for me, and he provides a full page outline, and Howard writes the story perfectly, and it's good. The stories in this are all Costigans, but there are a few in it that are darker. They're becoming darker towards the end. For the Honor of the Ship, for instance, Honor of the Ship, which I actually really like for reasons that aren't have anything to do with, humor. It's Howard explaining through Costigan what it means to have honor amongst your friends.
Right.
He was having some issues with girls at the time, and one of his buddies right about that same time. And Costigan basically embodies the short-fused, quick-tempered, make a misunderstanding of a situation, and then makes it worse.
Right.
This particular story, there's a little bit more seriousness in some of these stories. There's even some deaths in this some of the in the second half of the volume. But by and large, guys, it's just another Costigan. Together, there's 2 volumes of Costigan,
A lot.
Yeah, so that's what that's what volume 3 has. It's just more Costigan, which is always a good thing in my book.
Yes, and the thing about the Costigan in volume 3 is because of how they fall chronologically. This is where people are going to see, if you've read any of this stuff before, you're going to see the Dennis Dorgan stories there, undorganed and re-Costiganed, which doesn't take much to do. It's a little erasure and then we're good. But yeah, so that's that tells you kind of where they fit in the timeline. And so when you get to volume 4, it's the Kid Allison stuff. The Kid Allison stories came about because Fight Stories magazine was having really good success with Sailor Steve. Evidently, they were getting letters. It was not the same culture as Weird Tales, so we didn't always see all of the letters published, but they did. Byrne specifically said, "I'm glad you're going to write more stories. All of us here are for him." And Street and Smith, the people that published The Shadow, and they're one of the big pulp publishers, they actually reached out to Howard to see if he would move Steve Costigan over to Sports Story magazine. And he said, I kind of want to go home with the date that brung me here. He didn't say it like that. I corn-pwned it up for you. But it was basically well, they've got this, but I'll write you another character just for you. And they said yes. And so he wrote, this is where Kid Allison comes in. And the difference is between Kid Allison and Sailor Steve Costigan, you don't, if you're not a boxing person, you're not necessarily going to understand. Allison was a contender. Allison was his, let's not say legit boxer, but he was definitely, he had an agent, he had a trainer, they had a trajectory, they were planning fights ahead, the difference. Yeah. And the difference between that and Costigan is Costigan was what they called a ham and egger. He would pick up fights on the side. He would fight on the wharf. He'd fight for $30. You know, anytime there was an alley, that's a good place for a scrap. They were very different characters culturally. The humor is different as well. It's just as funny, and it works off the same kinds of exaggerations. But he had a straight girlfriend. He had, for all intents and purposes, it was a more, I don't want to even say civilized. That's a terrible word for this. Um, but he was writing the converse of Costigan. Costigan is the port side guy, and Kid Allison is the fighting arena guy.
Right.
Street and Smith only published 3 of them, but he wrote 8 of them, and so 2 or 3 had shown up in different places over the years. This book is the first place where they're all in one place at the same time. And then the last thing that's in volume 4 is the stuff that he wrote towards the end of his life. And those tend to be serious boxing stories, and they're great boxing stories. If I think the equivalency of the boxing, the quality of the writing in these boxing stories is a lot like the quality of the writing in the El Barak stories that he wrote in 34 and 35, towards the end of his career after he'd worked a bunch of stuff out. So we go out really kind of on a high note with volume 4, because there's not a lot of false starts in there. It's all like it's the goods. So that's what's in the 4 volumes, and the essays reflect the material, and hopefully give you a greater context for their place in not only Howard's personal canon, but in the overall architecture of the 20th century as a cultural artifact.
Okay. Let's start delving into volume 1. I've got an alarm that's going off. I need to go shut off. So I'll ask you real quick. You've both used the terms atavism, atavist, and Iron Man, Iron Men. Could you explain to everybody what those terms meant in Robert E. Howard's writing?
Yes. Chris, talk about atavism, and I will follow up with Iron Man.
Okay. I think it was around 2005, 2006, I wrote Atavist All.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote it because I had come across a Howard story where he talked about this thing called atavism and atavar. And what essentially atavism is like a theme that Howard he consciously put into all of his boxing stories in some way, shape, or form. It was in there pretty much everything. His fighters, what they are, his Iron Men, his boxers, or generally speaking, his protagonists are fighters that they're throwbacks, they're rugged, they're instinctive men. Okay, these are guys that are shaped by their like ancestral memories and uh, regressive traits rather than products of learned like discipline,
Right.
Spartan, monkish, slavish even regimens of training and you do this when they do that, action reaction, learned. And he did this very specific. The atavism for him was basically primitive traits that would kind of pop out of somebody on a timeline. So if you think of a timeline, the beginning of humanity, the primitive till now, the atavist in Howard's mind was a trait that allowed mankind to survive his rugged primitive beginnings.
Yeah.
And that trait over time was kind of beaten out by the decaying and rotting influence of civilization. And again, this kind of echoes what was happening during Howard's young life when he looked at the old men around him, not even old men, even his father and his grandparents and the people of that era were embracing this longing for the old ways, the old days, the old things, the things that in the past made men men and women women, you know. And so for Howard, atavism wasn't just a pseudo-scientific trait. It was a trait in a mindset
Yeah.
that embraced the past as the clean representation, the model of humanity. Okay, um, his boxers embrace all these things. They're very rarely, except with very few, Maloney and Jack Maloney from They Always Come
Mhm.
Back, and Kid Allison would
Yeah.
be primary examples of those guys that walk that line between the primitive and the modern. But by and large, his most famous boxing creations are the Costigans, the Kirby Carnes, the Iron Mike, and his brother Steve. They're all the kind of the same. These are guys that are throwbacks. They're described as
Oh yeah.
hairy and ugly and gorilla-like, and he's drawing a distinct difference between the past and what these new modern boxers. They're clean shaven, they're always good looking, and they're put their wants and desires above what he's doing. Oh, I'm fighting for my friends, I'm fighting for my dog, I'm fighting for my girl, or to get a girl, never for really themselves.
Right.
There's a good and a bad morality placed on this idea of atavism. So when we there's the scientific version of atavism, which is, like I said, a trait, a physical trait that comes out under the influence of stress, or just a recurring trait that, let's say, a person, everybody in Rusty Burke's family is 6'5" or more, and everybody else in his town is 5'10". That's because their great 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 grandpappy was 7 feet tall and wrestled Bigfoot, that kind of thing, uh, going way back. And so I would say that his boxers embrace guts and grip, honor, fighting, extraordinary ability to take punishment, the kind of punishment that would have helped their ancestors survive the
Right.
primitive uh, struggles of life back in the day. And modern boxers are hard-won experience, but they train. They rely on these gadgets and these gimmicks. We'll do these workout equipment. But they don't have that heart, that passion, that drive when things go wrong. The old folks, they didn't even have, heating oil. They used coal. Uh,
Right.
they, Everything was a look back to the past for what was good, and everything in the future was looked at as with suspicion. And the it was, modern times were looked at as being deceptive, cloying, fake, uh, reliant upon others for the things you want, deceitful, all the bad things. And for Howard, atavism was a combination of this science, physical science, but also the social prism through which good, good and bad could
Yeah.
could be viewed. Um, I would also probably say that he he exaggerated their physical appearances as well to make them stand in stark contrast to these modern men
Oh
with
yes.
their haircuts and their patent shoes. And this kind of goes back to Dempsey. Dempsey was this amazing force of nature for a short time. And one of the things is he lived probably one of the hardest early lives of any of these boxers of any color. It's truly amazing what his Kid Blackie days were like. But he allowed himself to be talked into, and this is an anecdote that supports what I'm talking about. He allowed himself to be talked into a photo op where, he was dressed as somebody that was working on the railroad yard, but he was wearing beautiful patent shoes because he had just become the champion of the world. And everybody, all the people who had helped raise him up as this example of what it was like to struggle and to, just like in the old days, back in the days, and he has that fierce lion-like approach to boxing that primitive past. The boxers today, they don't have it. They're wilt behind it. But now he's wearing these shoes and he's supposed to be stoking a fire on a train. He's a fake and a phony. He is the jazz age. He is the modern fighter. Oh, and so for Howard, these things play out in a way that that basically kind of goes back. It's like an early Mark. This is help me out here. This is where I kind of think that the circle of Howard's rise and falls of civilization plays out
Yes.
first. Okay, where you see the cycle of the rise, the decay, the fall, and it happens for his the mechanism that his boxers use, or excuse me,
Right.
that he
They
uses
reach the
boxers.
pinnacle and
Yeah,
then they
sorry,
become
I'm getting
complacent.
all over.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They reach the pinnacle and then they become complacent. And then that's when the challenger comes up and he's hungry. He doesn't have it's basically Rocky 3.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
It's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Rocky 3.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
And Clubber Lane is definitely an atavist, you know. The Yeah, no, that's and so that whole concept, that idea of these traits that were present in an earlier time that are now as a sort of regressively coming forward. I mean, he always describes Costigan as a gorilla, you know, so much so that at one point when the lights go off and you can only see his silhouette from the back, you know, with the light behind him, his silhouette, it looks like a gorilla, you know. So this is all those animal traits are part of atavism and that idea that these guys are closer to the natural world
Yes,
uh, by virtue of who they are and their ancestry and their genes and all that. So when you pair that with the concept of an Iron Man, okay, and this is something that was uh, often spoken about with regards to the Golden Age boxers. These were the guys who were fighting before the Marquis of Queensberry rules. Okay, so back then, the gloves that you used, the weight of the gloves and the padding varied from fight to fight, arena to arena. There wasn't a standard. Um, uh, One of the biggest fights ever was Jeffries versus Sharkey, 26 rounds under giant
lights.
Klieg lights that was so hot that it literally burned the hair off of their scalps. They would have gone to 27, except that neither guy could move. You know, they'd broken ribs, and I mean, so all of that was part of this. And so the Iron Man was the boxer who could withstand an inhuman amount of punishment. Does this sound like any of Robert E. Howard's other characters? I'm just asking for a friend. But but that's the Iron Man idea. These are the guys that he writes an essay about it for a little fanzine that he did. And the essay wasn't quite finished, but he was getting his thoughts down, and the thoughts were along the lines of, you know, what is it that makes an Iron Man? Is it extra calcium in the plates of his skull that allow him to withstand more punishment? Is it denser muscles that allow him to absorb more physical abuse? He ruminates on this a lot and ranks his favorite Iron Man of all time. And this is we mentioned Jim Jeffries and Tom Sharkey; those guys were Iron Men. Bob Fitzsimmons,
Battling Nelson,
Corbett, Battling Nelson, Joe Grimm. Yeah, these guys, he had a list of all of them and with little notes about them, because this was all, again, the folklore of boxing. And this was something that Howard really absorbed and responded to. And so it's not a stretch to suggest that all of this accumulated wisdom and reading and supposing and cogitating sort of honed down into the shape of Howard's boxers, and then by extension other characters as well that worked with these same sorts of physical attributes and characteristics.
Yeah, every I was thinking while you were talking a little bit more about this, and really what it comes down to is that atavism for Howard was best played out, at least in this genre, through the ring. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
The ring is like a modern battlefield. It's the battlefield upon which all this ancestral memories, all the stuff that he talks about in just about every one of his famous stories, no matter who you're really talking about, you got ancestral memories, right? You got the idea that there are physical differences that you were just talking about. Battling Nelson, for instance, he got that whole idea from the folks that were trying to figure out how Battling Nelson could actually withstand the brutality of the fights that he was in. We're talking
Right.
30, 40, 50 round fights of just staying in the ring, head to head, slugging each other. Just very
Yeah.
little science at all.
Yeah.
That's kind of,
Not knockouts, fights to a standstill.
yeah,
Yeah.
because these guys really were apart from humanity, and I think it made the rest of humanity, and it made an impact on Howard. And he took what he saw and said, "I could write about that," and
Yeah.
he did. And atavism plays a role in that. Okay, for
Hmm.
him, atavist fighters, they heart, guts, and grip. Their willpower, that's what they rely on. They don't rely on science. They don't rely on jab, 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 cross, hook. They don't. They're not pattern fighters. They're all
It's the
heart.
will to get up, to
Yep.
stay on your feet. Yep.
And
Right
exactly.
back in.
He melds that right with the fears that people were at that time afraid of, or at least they were told to be afraid of. And that's uh, racial decline. We're becoming overly civilized.
Yeah.
The best one, and I wrote about the cult of masculinity, the loss of masculinity.
Hmm.
These were fears that people were talking about, and science was viewed as kind of the gateway drug to this new feminization of the American male. And I don't know. Atavism is it's not just traits. It's not just this pseudoscience. It's all the exaggerated physicality that we talked about with the hairy, the looks. All of that is deliberately set so that the boxers can rely on those things that would best, I think, uh, draw in the average reader of these stories who were invested personally in boxers, people that
Yeah.
looked like them or had the same last name. Oh, that's the Irishman. I'm an Irishman.
Right.
Uh, there's a lot of tribalism in here, but really it finds its way in all of his, I think all of his fiction, but most easy to discern inside the boxing tales. And if anything, atavism as a thematic concept
Yeah.
in the work, undergirding and supporting the Ironman uh, um, archetype, that alone makes it worth study,
Hmm.
even if you hate it. You know, even if you hate it, that alone, I think you and I had this talk a million times, and Jeff and Leo, and we all kind of agree these are worth reading just so you can understand where he's coming from.
Yeah.
Because where he's coming from is going to lead you to Conan. It's going to lead you to Cole. It's going to lead you in different places. The reason why these guys act the way they do, it comes from real people, or at least exaggerated examples that he creatively manipulated
Yes.
to create great
Absolutely.
stories. That's how I look at it.
Could you say also that his writing of these stories with his use of atavism and Iron Men plays out in his letters to H.P. Lovecraft, where they're arguing about brains versus brawn,
Oh yeah.
civilization versus frontier living, and
He'd already been working on this stuff when he and Lovecraft started corresponding. And so I think he was already sort of in that mindset anyways. Um, and that's so much of what Howard wrote, especially from like 30 on, you can apply that sort of lens of the barbarism versus civilization discussion to it. and absolutely that's a part of it. And I think it's one of the reasons why Howard argued with such facility and as convincingly as he did. He wasn't, I mean, because again, initially he was a little deferential of Lovecraft because, he was older, smarter, so we thought, and but when you start talking about watching this guy uh hit a man with his fist and break his jaw and drop him to the ground with one blow, that Howard knew. He didn't, Lovecraft didn't know that, but Howard did. These were people at, at the Icehouse, at the oil fields, in the cow camps, all of these kinds of guys. He grew up with them, and so this gave him, I think, an intellectual footing early on in that conversation. And I think that's why he never really gave any
I see.
where Lovecraft is concerned. I think uh this was his hill to die on, so to
I
speak.
completely agree with you, Mark, because uh, he started out deferential in pretty much everything, and he would defer, but not quite cave when it. And I
Right.
tell you the reason why I feel like it, as the conversations went on, it became more personal, I think, for Howard, because really what he viewed himself as these boxers, he viewed
Yeah.
himself as these workers, he viewed himself as the people he was talking about. These were
Mhm.
his people, and the pushback initially was deferential, certainly polite, but it became more and more insistent that you don't really know what you're talking about. And you started to see the revelations that you and I long suspected were there, and that's the revelation that I am that guy. You can find Robert E. Howard in Sailor Steve Costigan. You can find Robert E. Howard in Kirby Carnes. You can find him in even in Breck Elkins, because he is placing himself. He says in the letters. He talks
Yeah.
about himself doing many of these things. He talks often about wanting to be, having been born in a different generation would have been better. These are the same things that when we talk about atavism, these desires to be something else. At, the atavism aspect is there as well, because those boxers, Dev Devlin, for instance, in the atavism, he doesn't feel like he belongs anywhere.
Right.
Costigan never feels quite right. Bull in a china shop when he's talking to a dame, unless he's drunk, and then he has the wrong kind of courage, right? Uh,
Right.
but these guys don't feel welcome in polite society. That's you see
Mhm.
it all at least six different of the Costigan stories, where even in two or three of the Allisons as well, there's a difference, and they recognize the difference. They know they're different.
Oh
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, and so you can see Howard then is talking to HP about things he'd written, 7 years ago, and he's telling him, I wish I could, I really like an able-bodied dancing girl. I like, if I could have been anything, I'd have been a professional fighter. I'd rather be a successful professional fighter, he said, than a great writer.
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm a writer, but he's telling Howard, John, that he wishes he were the things that he was writing. We're getting a window into the man. That's again another reason why we should be studying these stories.
Yep.
And even volume one, with all the juvenilia, all those stops and starts, the seeds of everything you've grown to appreciate as a reader of Robert E. Howard's more commercial work, it's there. And you can
Yes.
see the beginnings, okay?
Yep.
All right. Well, let's ask you each what are one or two of your favorite stories in volume one?
We're both going to say the Weeping Willow. We're because that's just good. That's just funny. The joke works, and it's the first time I think he was starting to dial in some of the humor, and there's
Yeah,
a
sure.
real sense of that. I'm trying to think if something else comes to mind just off the top of my head.
Well, for me, the two would be Iron Man, and they always come
Yeah.
back for different reasons. One of the reasons I'm just going to mention they always come back is because of how much Patrice despises the story. He does not like it at all. I like it. I think it's great because Jack Maloney is in Iron Man, and he's referred. So there's that verisimilitude that we talked about before. This connective tissue, this viscera, right,
Right.
between all these different characters popping up, but not just popping up, but popping up with the record intact, the recollections accurate, the even the fight venue where they fought. I mean, it's all just dropped like a newspaper article that you could. It's amazing. They always come back is a redemption story though. Okay. And by the way, Maloney is a prime example for Howard of the modern boxer. He's got it all on Brennan, right?
Yep.
He's just he's a great scientific boxer, and he basically unloads everything he's been taught on Brennan, and he gets KO'd. Oh,
Yep.
maybe I shouldn't give away that small aspect of the story. It's not even a paragraph, by the way. But Iron Man, you get the archetype, you get to see the world building in its final stage.
Yeah.
Kid Allison's in there. People forget Kid Allison's in there. Maloney's in there. All Costigans both are in there.
Right.
You get to see the culmination of everything that makes these stories great, and that's
Yeah.
why I think it's probably his greatest straight. It doesn't have the best opening, though. I like the opening. My favorite opening would have been a Fist of the Desert, but that's for a different volume. So
Yeah.
I'll go with Iron Man.
There you go.
What about the poetry that's in you included in the book?
What
Well,
about it? Love it.
I love it. It's fun. It's not heavy, but that's okay. It doesn't have to be.
So
Uh,
John L. Sullivan is a poem in that group of poems. It's about John L. Sullivan, whom we talked about earlier,
mhm.
the legendary heavyweight champion of the world, the last bare knuckle champion. Okay,
Mhm.
the actual last one. And the story of how he got it is just great reading. But what makes the poem so cool is I've turned it into a drinking song that
Yes.
during the poetry throwdown, you can read it as a drinking song, and it's perfect for it. Tip one back for old John L. That's
Boom.
the how it ends each of the stanzas, and it's so perfectly written. It's such a great thing to share with folks who are there for the poetry. They'll sit down at Howard Days, and there's a time where we set aside for poetry readings where the fans can get up and read a poem, and we encourage people who had no idea he wrote poems to thumb through the books and see if maybe there's a poem you'd like to read, and they go up in there and they read it. Well, I do that one every year.
Yeah,
Okay, I do
that's a
that one
fun one.
every year.
Yep.
And do people drink when you have them or
They
tell them
do. They absolutely do. Uh,
Nobody says when Gruber says drink, you drink. Okay, that's how this works here. All right. We all know which side our bread's buttered on. Okay.
when I first did it, there's a chorus of maybe two or three people. There was people didn't know each other. It's gotten to a point now where people have been coming enough that
Yeah.
they jump in, and the new folks are caught up in the enthusiasm. I don't know if you can tell this, but I'm really enthusiastic about this particular material. This King Cole, I've poured a lot of heart and soul into King Cole research, done a lot of work with that. All this stuff really, really moves me. Robert E. Howard's work really moves me. And I love sharing it. I love promoting it. I try to do it scholarly when I need to, but when I'm in doubt, I fall back on my enthusiasm for the work. Okay. And this song is just, or song, excuse me, I'm calling it a song. The poem that that I sort of sing, if you can call what my warbling a singing voice, that it brings people together. And each year it's gotten a little bit more, a little bit more, and a little bit more. And so you've got about 20, 30 people going, tip one back for old John L. It's fun. It's really fun. What a facility with words
Yep.
he had.
I love and I this is something I wanted to mention this now. Whenever we do Fist of the Icehouse, It's become kind of an annual thing. We're not going to do it this year because we got too much going on. We're going to give it a break, um, but when we do it, there's always, without exception, at least one or two people that will come up to us afterwards and go, I had no idea. I had no idea. And that's always the best part, because that's really what it's all about. It's about getting people to a different place. You come in, I'm just a Conan fan. Well, here's all this other stuff too. Well, I think I'll give this a try. Oh, I had no idea I was going to like whatever else too. Um, and one of our favorite things to do is to get somebody excited about the boxing stories, set the hook, and then reel them in with either a reading or a poem or a couple of good anecdotes or whatever, and they always come back and they thank us, or they are just flabbergasted that the guy in their head, this dark brooding guy that wrote these Conan stories, could also do this as well. So it really rewards us, and that's why we keep doing it.
Yeah, Fists of Iron really, these 4 volumes really gave us the opportunity to share the full breadth of the man and the work. It really did. And
After Blood and Thunder, those are the ones that I'm most proud
yeah,
about. Yeah.
yeah. So I too agree that that's always fun. And I also can say there's been many folks who've come to me saying that I just don't get it before they've read it.
Right.
Before I drop however much it costs for this book, or I go on eBay and get it, tell me why. I had a conversation with uh, our favorite German, Dirk Gunther, and Dirk he still doesn't love, but he's come around to, oh yeah, these are important. Now I get that for sure.
Yeah.
And then there's been a few where he went, actually, that was a pretty good story. That reluctant admission sometimes is just as satisfying because
Oh, totally. Yes.
just because I like it doesn't mean you have to like it. All I'm asking, no, all I'm demanding is that you take this subject matter material, this all of this material seriously.
Hmm.
It is not just throwaway. It is not empty of meaning. It is absolutely critical if you're going to look at him as a man and an author fully. You
Yep.
can't do it without it.
Right.
Okay? If nothing else, just understand that to get here, wherever that here may be for you, could be Cole, could be Conan, you gotta stop here at some
Yeah.
point. Got to.
There it is.
All right. Well, do y'all have anything else y'all would like to add at this point?
I think we've done enough.
Well, I there is one thing I'd like to say.
Go.
Uh, she's gone now, and she won't be able to see this, but to to Eileen in Donahoe, who ran Galaxy of Books, man, I every year I'd go visit her when we went back to Illinois, Yoshi and my wife and I. And every year I'd stop there, and I loved the fact that she was able to meet my kids and
Yeah.
tell them what a pain in the ass I was. And I I told her that she told Mark, she told me before she died 2 years ago that folks were stopping in her place because they had heard me talk about Galaxy of Books, and she couldn't
Oh,
be. And she would always tell them the same thing. Okay, I was a fan first before
yeah.
Chris Gruber because she was, and I owe her a debt.
Yeah.
Yeah. So wherever you are, Eileen, thank you.
All
So
Yep.
right.
Here's to you, Eileen.
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah.
So, for everybody wondering about the other books, we will eventually get around to doing a part two and a part three. Our next one will be on the 2 volumes with the Sailor Steve Costigan stories and the one official Dennis Dorgan story in them. And then we'll finish up with volume 4 with the Kid Allison and other stories in it. So, thank you, gentlemen, for doing this. It's been wonderful, very informative, and we will hopefully uh, Unfortunately, I don't have a copy of the new Ultimate Edition of Volume One. I know you both got yours. I still haven't bought mine yet. I need to buy mine, and we're waiting for our artist to do the covers for Volume Two and Volume Three.
Oh
So,
boy.
Very excited.
because they're
I
ready to
am
go.
excited.
So hopefully they will be out and ready by Howard Days at the absolute latest, and hopefully even sooner. Sometime,
Awesome.
hopefully in April, they might be hopefully available to be ordered online from the Howard Foundation or from Amazon.
Outstanding.
Yep.
So
And well, John, hopefully Patrice won't take exception to our gentle ribbing, but really appreciate all the hard work that he did,
yes,
Yeah.
because it was a monumental task. And I also want to shout out to Jeff Shanks
Yeah.
for doing the
yeah,
Fist of Iron. He's one of my buddies that I talk about boxing and combat sports. He's got a rich and deep history in that world, and he and I have had some really good conversations. So yeah,
Yeah.
same as Tevis and Howard and all those folks that Howard grew up with. Same kind of
yeah.
thing. Thank you,
All right
Mark.
then. Well, I guess we will go ahead and end it here. And so thank you guys. Thanks everybody for watching. If you have enjoyed this, please hit like and please subscribe for more on Robert E. Howard and his works.
Thanks, guys. Always a pleasure.
Jerusha!